Throughout video game history, there have been some series where you wonder why the sequels never end. However, there are others which seemingly shouldn't get sequels either because of lack of sales, development troubles, or because they don't need it. Then they get sequels anyway, and they're pretty darn good, sometimes even better than the original. Let's take a look at 15 such sequels here, though beware of spoilers. Titanfall 2. For as brilliant as its multiplayer was at launch, Titanfall had some major issues with balance, content, and post-launch support. The throwaway story didn't help either, and despite a positive critical reception, player numbers dropped off, leaving doubts as to whether Respawn would revisit the franchise. But not only did Titanfall 2 happen, even with how disagreeable some of the multiplayer changes were, it had an incredible campaign that stands as one of the best in the genre. Sadly, its sales and player count dipped even quicker, and the series is more or less AWOL. The Last of Us Part 2. By all accounts, The Last of Us had the perfect ending. Joel saved Ellie, but it wasn't without a price as her trust in him was shaken. What made the ending so perfect is its inconclusiveness. Joel being the bad guy or the good guy, the real answer being far from simple, and the uncertainty in his future with Ellie seemed fitting for the game's post-apocalyptic story. So when The Last of Us Part 2 rolled around, it focused on Ellie's perspective, exploring revenge, redemption, and forgiveness in equal measure, provided its own unforgettable experience in the process. Baldur's Gate 3. It's not that fans didn't want Baldur's Gate 3 to happen, especially after how great the second game was. It's just that it seemed impossible. Baldur's Gate 3, The Black Hound, was in development at Black Isle Studios but was cancelled in 2003. But earlier this year, Larian Studios announced that it was developing Baldur's Gate 3. It's currently in early access and has a ways to go, but initial impressions are very positive so far, even with some still debating on the changes to turn-based combat and presentation. Watch Dogs 2. Ubisoft not releasing a sequel to one of its open-world titles, especially one that sold very well, sounds laughable. But for all intents and purposes, and leaving aside all the controversies that dogged Watch Dogs, Aiden's story was over. Besides, with other projects being prioritized, surely it would be fine to keep the Watch Dogs IP on ice for a while. But lo and behold, Watch Dogs 2 came out 2 years later, and was immediately a better experience with an improved open world and missions, better activities, and a more likable protagonist. It also focused primarily on DedSec and expanded the impact of CTOS much more. The Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky the Third. Story-wise, Trails in the Sky first chapter and second chapter are the core of the trilogy. There's no doubt about it. In comparison, Trails in the Sky the Third is an extensive epilogue, taking place after the main story and centering on Kevin Graham. Despite the game's heavy focus on battles, it offered up some wicked challenges, enjoyable lore sequences for various characters, and served as an excellent story in its own right. You could skip it and move on to the Crossbell and Erebonia arcs, but it's worth enjoying for what it offers. Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption inevitably enters the conversation for perfect endings. It started out as the story of John Marston working to free his family by hunting down his old gang members. And when the government inevitably betrayed John, who sacrificed himself to save his family, his son Jack avenged him. It's a complete story through and through. So Red Dead Redemption 2 took a different route, acting as a sequel and exploring the downfall of the Vanderlyn gang in its own incredible tale. In terms of open world design and storytelling, it's still a triumph and serves to make John's story in Red Dead Redemption all the more significant. AZURE Striker Gunvolt 2. From a story standpoint, AZURE Striker Gunvolt felt more or less done. The Sumeragi group has been defeated, Asimov, the treacherous leader of Quill, had his plan scuttled, and Gunvolt proceeds to go on the run. Sales were decent as well, so it seemed like a sequel was possible but not super likely. Of course, a year later, Inti Creates confirmed that a sequel was in development, upping the ante further by having 2 playable characters and different routes. Naturally, it was a big step up in terms of gameplay and level design, even if the story wasn't super strong. The Darkness 2. In much the same vein, Jackie's story in the Darkness felt concluded, even if it ended ambiguously. Sales were good, but with Starbreeze Studios working on Syndicate, a sequel didn't seem like it would be happening. Digital Extremes, who went on to develop Warframe, would be brought in to develop the sequel and took 3 years. Overall, The Darkness 2 was a pretty good follow-up, offering more of the same gameplay, but with the action and gore dialed up to 11. The Evil Within 2. Despite rough controls and story problems, Tango Gameworks' The Evil Within was a good horror game, and a satisfying throwback to the Silent Hills and Resident Evils of yore. The ending wrapped up things neatly as well, despite the bit at the end with Ruvik potentially occupying Leslie's body. Its sales weren't anything crazy, so it wouldn't have been strange to see Bethesda move on to something else. 3 years later, The Evil Within 2 was announced and released in October with open-world elements, crafting, refined shooting, and plenty more horrors. Though the sales were again nothing crazy, and perhaps even worse than the original, it still stands as a fun game and significant improvement over the original in almost every way. God of War 2018. Sure, God of War 3 ended with a tease that Kratos might be alive, but Olympus had quite literally fallen. Zeus was dead. Where could the story possibly go from there, besides prequels like God of War Ascension? As it turns out, into the realm of Norse mythology with an older, wiser, and yet angrier Kratos who now had a son. Despite reimagining everything from the ground up, from the combat to the exploration and storytelling, God of War 2018 is a series best yet with 10 million copies sold as of May 2019, universal acclaim from critics, and heaps of awards. Command & Conquer 3 Tiberium Wars. For a series as influential as Command & Conquer, it didn't feel like a sequel was needed after Tiberian Sun. Couple this with the fact that the Red Alert franchise was doing great, and Command & Conquer Generals had also met strong acclaim. But the truth of the matter is that Command & Conquer 3 Tiberium Wars was embroiled in development trouble starting from 2001. Westwood Studios was shut down, the original team was split up, and those who remained went to EA Los Angeles. The project was even set aside in favor of Red Alert 3. However, in March 2007, 8 years after Tiberian Sun, Command & Conquer 3 Tiberium Wars finally released and remains an excellent title to this day. Gears of War 4. In hindsight, it's kind of funny how much Gears of War 3 was built up as the ultimate finale to the franchise. The Locust and Lambent were gone, the world was no longer dependent on emulsion, and peace finally reigned. Then of course we cut to Gears 4 where the Locust are back as the Swarm. The good news is that even with how safe the campaign was and how annoying the changes were to Horde mode, Gears 4 was still pretty good with excellent visuals, a new group of heroes to rally behind, and some nice new gameplay additions. Nothing revolutionary, but still a good follow-up. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Nintendo released Super Smash Bros. Ultimate for the Wii U and 3DS near the tail end of the Wii U's life cycle. Given the number of characters it had and the company being open to bringing Wii U titles to the Switch, it seemed like a shoo-in for a high-res remaster. Instead, the company, along with Bandai Namco Studios and Sora Limited, created Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. It had a much larger roster, introduced heaps of new moves and stages, a brand new story mode, and spirits for even more hijinks. Even with iffy online play, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate stands out as the most definitive title in the series and a pretty good fighting game on its own. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. The Legend of Zelda has always been an interesting franchise because of the standalone nature of each story. Each game is wrapped up near perfectly, and there's no better example than The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. You battle Aghanim, venture to the Dark Realm, defeat Ganon, peace returns to Hyrule, roll credits. However, Nintendo experimented more with sequels as the years went by, starting in the Nintendo 64 era with Majora's Mask. Eventually, The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds was released for the 3DS in 2013 and had new mechanics like item rental, allowing players to tackle dungeons in any order they chose. Despite having to follow a classic, A Link Between Worlds was critically acclaimed and beloved by fans. Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. Back in the day, Game Freak was content to release enhanced versions of its hit Pokemon titles. Pokemon Yellow was an enhanced version of the Pokemon Red and Blue. Pokemon Crystal followed Pokemon Gold and Silver, and so on. This formula worked well, but after Pokemon Black and White, the company did something completely different. It released a sequel, Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 advanced the story, taking place 2 years later while adding new locations, new Pokemon, the Pokemon World Tournament, and even higher difficulties. Even if it wasn't super innovative, it offered more fun content to play through and was a huge success with fans. And that wraps it up. If you like what we are doing, please consider subscribing to our channel, and don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon. That way you will never miss out on any of our videos.